Morning. Now, are you going to be a grumpy old dinosaur when it comes to this childcare thing? What exactly are your objections?
Well, I've got two objections, really. One, I don't particularly feel the need to subsidise other people's children and child-raising situations. If you want to have children, I think you should at least have some plan in action to pay for it. I understand if you want to go to work and you have to put your children in care for a while, that's fine. You know, but up to a point, Lord Copper, I think is my point. I was hearing people saying yesterday, when calling in on radio shows, oh, we're going to be £700 a month better off. I'm going, that's an awful lot of money to be giving people, which is essentially taxpayers' money that you're going to be giving people, and it's an awfully big investment. And the second part of it is that it's kind of a slow burn, isn't it? It's not really happening to a large extent until next year and the year after. That's my basic kind of complaint.
Okay, so those two things we can take separately. The first one is a principled objection, and the second one is a practical one about how it'll all take too long. In fact, the two things aren't that compatible. I mean, if you don't like the principle, you might be quite pleased that it's all going to take ages to actually happen if it ever does. But just looking at the principle, you know, you're sort of saying, why should I'm paraphrasing here, why should I subsidise other people's kids?
Yeah.
I mean, these are decisions that politicians have to make all the time. So, you know, you might just as well say, why should I subsidise fat people on the NHS? Or why should
that's a good question as well.
anyone who has any kind of health condition relating to smoking or alcohol? All of those things are a result of self-indulgence that don't help anyone else. Having children is probably something that overall is quite good in limited numbers for the country. We don't want to just die out. So it's probably a good idea that we keep the population going. That's not an entirely selfish thing to do. And it's probably not a good idea that huge numbers of parents, and it is usually mothers, are not able to work because childcare is just too expensive. So you're going to have the children either way. You might as well get these mothers into a position where it's actually affordable for them to work.
Well, possibly, but it depends really, doesn't it? Because the other problem with subsidising it is that you're actually a bit like the grants that people are getting to pay their electricity bills. You're basically paying that money to women or parents who then give the money to profit-making enterprises. So you're actually subsidising people who are making rather a lot of money out of it, which again I don't think is a very conservative principle.
Well, you're just wrong about that, because unfortunately these generally nursery providers are not making a very great deal of money, and certainly the people providing the childcare aren't making a great deal of money either. We've got a real problem with nursery providers going out of business, diminishing the supply, and then you've got a smaller pool of providers who are then raising their prices, and you're in a vicious circle. Now, one of the reasons that there is not enough provision is that there's far too much, in my view, far too much regulation. It's always the same with this stuff. You know, of course, we don't want a free-for-all that anyone can set up, you know, some kind of dodgy nursery which has no kind of inspection or regulation at all. But I think there's far too much fussing about the detail around the edges. You know, I mean, sometimes the fundamentals are missed. Plenty of nurseries have very little, even no outdoor space, which seems to me one of the most important things for a nursery. And yet, you know, there's a meticulous tick boxing about almost everything else, which is quite marginal. So again, also ratios, all of that stuff I think is really important in terms of how viable these businesses are. You know, I, over the years, have spent a gargantuan amount on childcare, over £500,000 in the course of my career. I've only been able to do that because I'm lucky enough to have really well...
That's kind of mad, though, isn't it? I mean, does that not tell you that there's something massively wrong with the system? And so propping it up and giving more money to it doesn't seem to me to be the way to cure the problem.
Well, you know, in my case, actually, I mean, if you've got multiple children, it is cheaper to have a nanny, and then you're in a whole other world of hurt of basically being an employer with all the responsibilities that goes along with that. And in particular, for example, having to set up pension schemes for people you know are probably only going to be with you for a year, sometimes less. You know, there's just so much red tape around this stuff. And being a nanny is, of course, a proper profession for many in the business. But let's be honest, for many people it isn't. You know, it's just something that they're trying their hand at.
Also, most people who are having children will be probably listening to this going, a nanny? for heaven's sake, I can barely afford to put the food on the table. We can't afford a nanny, but effectively it's the nanny state that is the nanny because, you know, unfortunately, you know, we're all paying to look after people. I'm just really worried about this kind of growing sense that the government is in charge and the government is going to grant us some of our own money to raise our own children and then telling us then to go back to work. You know, it just doesn't feel right to me.
Well, that you and I can definitely agree on.
Thank God.
You know, I don't want a massive increase in the size of the state. You know, we know that that has happened to an enormous extent over the last 20 years. And, you know, you're absolutely right that there's a supreme irony in continuing to take ever more of our taxes and then expecting us to be grateful when we get small bits of it back again. I mean, I listened to a very weak Tory MP. Fortunately for the individual concerned, I can't remember what their name was because they're so unimportant. But anyway, I listened to that MP talking to Nigel Farage yesterday, really trying to make a kind of virtue out of the fact that the Tories, as he put it, you know, saved all these businesses from going under during the pandemic. Well, hang on a minute. You're the ones that shut everything down. So those businesses were in peril in the first place. So there's been a complete kind of loss of fundamental conservatism on the part of the Conservatives. They've forgotten that the whole point of them is supposed to be opportunity for all, you know, opportunity for individuals, small state, high growth. They don't do any of that stuff.
They really don't. And a lot of people have been critical of this particular budget overall as a kind of Gordon Brown style budget with a sort of Conservative sticker lumped on it. And I can't really argue with that.
No, I mean, I can't either. I can't. I go on and on about it, but that's because I think it's incredibly important. What is this Conservative government doing? Hiking corporation tax from 19 to 25. No, they're trying to sort of persuade us all that that's okay because there's some way of, if you fill out, you know, 10,000 forms and meet 10,000 criteria, you might possibly be able to get a bit of a discount on some of your capital investment. Well, that doesn't really help many companies, especially not smaller ones providing services. And it doesn't help in the overall, if you zoom out to the decisions that foreign-based enterprises are making about whether or not they want to set up in Britain. I mean, why would you do that if you know you can go to Dublin or Dubai? In Dubai, there's no tax at all of this type.
No,
so I just don't think we can be competitive on this level.
No, I think that's the problem, and it doesn't appear to me, and I continue to make it in a more sort of macro level, I suppose. I continue to worry that all of the government that we currently have's view is that make it look as if you're doing something decent, but are you actually doing anything? You know, as I said to Julia, you know, the Windsor framework is not really much different to what it was before there was a Windsor framework. You know, the Migrant Stop the Boats campaign isn't stopping the boats, but they're saying they're going to. You know, we've now got the childcare initiative. We've got, you know, a growth initiative, supposedly. It all looks like they're doing something, but actually, are they doing anything?
You're absolutely right that so much of this is a comms triumph rather than an actual triumph. And I would say we could perhaps, if we're being generous, give Rishi Sunak, 6 months maybe to stop the boats coming over? I mean, if those boats are still coming over in large numbers in the autumn, and I confidently predict they will be, then his policy has failed. And I think he's set himself up for a big fall on this one. I've got no confidence it'll happen. If it does, then brilliant. You know, you've stopped a bad thing happening. It doesn't mean that you've actually created a good thing.
No, because you've still got all of the people here who came before you stopped them.
And they're still talking about very high numbers of immigration, which actually we don't need if we tackle the source of the problem of worklessness. Now, the government did try to go some way to tackling some of that in the budget yesterday. I thought the measures on making it easier for people with disabilities to actually get back into work sounded very, very good. And I know they were pushed for by the Centre for Social Justice, which is very sound on these matters. So I've got some optimism about that. And it's absolutely right that the world of work has changed massively, and it's no longer you know, an excuse if just because you can't get out the house and so on, that you can't do some kind of job online. After all, we now know that so many people are working from home anyway.
Right, exactly right. Let's finish up with a recap on the old lockdown files, because I see that there's an announcement coming soon, we think this afternoon from the government, that they're going to ban ministers being able to use TikTok and government officials being able to use TikTok on their official government phones. I mean, what the hell are they thinking? What are they doing with TikTok on a government phone anyway?
I've absolutely no idea. I've tried to master TikTok, and I have to say thus far I've failed. I'm not terribly motivated. And given that most politicians are sort of, you know, our age, they are generally middle-aged, I've no doubt they've spent ages trying to work out how to use the bloody thing. What are they doing spending their time on that? Already there are in any case questionable aspects to TikTok. Its Chinese origins and whether or not it's actually a wise thing to engage with. So I'm not surprised they're being told not to do it, only surprised that anyone thought it was an appropriate use of ministerial time.
Indeed. I mean, the only thing I said when I was on the talk the other night was maybe it would have stopped Matt Hancock from sending quite so many messages on WhatsApp. And maybe if you
I really doubt it.
I see he's trying to rehabilitate himself at Cheltenham this week.
Well, maybe there's going to be a whole other Matt Hancock rehabilitation tour. I mean, maybe he'll get rehired to go on I'm a Celebrity. It'll be a rare case of someone actually going twice into the jungle.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can see it all now, can't you?
I mean, he really does seem to be the man who will refuse to be put down. Just keeps popping up every time you think you think you finally put him to bed, and here he is again, popping up in all sorts of unlikely places.
What we need is his TikTok account, Mike, and then, you know, maybe there's lots of interesting things lurking in there, and we can go full circuit on this.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I mean, the Telegraph's work, which was largely provided, well, entirely provided by you, has been and gone. I mean, even in these days of 24-hour news cycles, it lasted a long time. It's still, I always say to people, you mustn't forget these stories. You know, it's important that we remember what that story was, and it doesn't just get lost in the sands of time, because so much does these days.
I totally agree with that, and I know the Telegraph is very keen to keep pushing on some of the key issues that were raised. So, for example, the time frame for the public inquiry, we still have no deadline for that, and I'm not going to be happy, and I'm sure millions of people will feel likewise with an inquiry that has no deadline. That's obviously a nonsense. And then also, I think one of the key things is a recognition of the ongoing struggles of people whose lives were affected by lockdown. You know, I heard somebody using the word nostalgia regarding lockdown recently. Oh, there's a bit of a sense of nostalgia. Please, there is no nostalgia for the millions of people who really suffered during this time. Right. So I know the Telegraph wants to continue highlighting those stories, in particular with a focus on children. And, you know, whilst the main thrust of the investigation is over, there's still an awful lot of material there left to explore.
Very much so. And for the Tory party and for MPs individually to say, we saved loads of businesses. Yeah, well, maybe, but you also killed loads of businesses as well. And there's people still recovering from that. And the 3.5 million freelancers who didn't get a penny.
Absolutely. You know, if you just didn't quite tick the box, you hadn't been, I can't remember exactly the criteria. I think it was being freelance for 2 years or something. If it just happened to be 1 year and 10 months, you were stuffed, essentially.
Yeah, but it was all right if you just invented a company the day before.
We should never lose our astonishment at what happened and our determination that never again should a small number of people allow power to go to their heads in such a way that they take control of our lives on a completely false prospectus in some cases.
Absolutely. Very good to see you, Isabel. Thank you very much indeed. I'll see you soon, I'm sure, in Ealing or somewhere. Isabel Oakeshott, TalkTV's international editor.